Imagine stepping back in time, over 1,000 years ago, to the bustling, sophisticated city of Baghdad. This was the heart of the Abbasid Caliphate, a global center of science, art, and culture. It's here our story begins, in the year 921. Our hero isn't a warrior or a king, but a scholar, a man of faith and learning named Ahmad ibn Fadlan. He was an educated man, a faqih, an expert in Islamic law and jurisprudence, serving the powerful Caliph al-Muqtadir. One day, an unusual request arrived at the Caliph's court. A letter came from a distant king in the cold, unknown lands of the north, Olmush, the king of the Volga Bulgars. He had recently converted to Islam and needed help. He asked the Caliph to send someone to teach his people the proper ways of the faith, to help build a mosque, and perhaps most importantly, to help him construct a fortress to defend against his rivals, the Khazars. The Caliph agreed, and a diplomatic mission was assembled. Ahmad ibn Fadlan was chosen to be a key part of this envoy, serving as the religious secretary and teacher. For Fadlan, this was the journey of a lifetime. He was leaving the known world, the heart of civilization as he knew it, for the wild, mysterious lands of the north, a place of myths and legends. The journey was epic and incredibly dangerous. Fadlan and his caravan of about 5,000 people and 3,000 pack animals set off from Baghdad on June 21, 921. They traveled northeast, through modern-day Iran and into Central Asia. They crossed deserts, navigated treacherous mountain passes, and braved the unforgiving cold of the Eurasian steppe. Fadlan meticulously documented everything in his journal, his risala. He wrote about the cities they passed, the people they met, and the hardships they faced. He described the Oghuz Turks, a nomadic people he found fierce and, in his words, like straying wild asses. He was both fascinated and appalled by their customs, which seemed utterly alien to his own refined, urban sensibilities. They faced brutal winters, with temperatures so cold that Fadlan describes men's beards freezing into blocks of ice. At one point they were delayed for months, waiting for a frozen river to thaw. This long, arduous journey was a true test of endurance, a culture shock of epic proportions for the scholar from Baghdad. After many months of travel, they finally reached the territory of the Volga Bulgars. But the mission didn't go exactly as planned. The money for the fortress never arrived, lost somewhere along the perilous route. Despite this setback, Fadlan did his best to fulfill his duties, teaching the Bulgars about Islam. But his real historical significance, the reason we remember him today, was about to unfold. It was here, on the banks of the mighty Volga River, that Ahmad ibn Fadlan had an encounter that would echo through history. He came face to face with a group of traders who had sailed down the river from even further north. They were a people he called the Russia, or the Rus. We know them today as the Vikings. Imagine the scene. Fadlan, a man from one of the world's most advanced civilizations, meets these towering, wild-looking traders from the north. His description of them is one of the most vivid and detailed eyewitness accounts of the Vikings that we have from that era. And let's just say he was not entirely impressed. He wrote, "I have never seen more perfect physical specimens, tall as date palms, blonde and ruddy." He admired their physical stature, but that's where the admiration ended. He was shocked by their hygiene, or rather, their lack of it. He called them the filthiest of God's creatures. He described a morning ritual where a servant girl would bring a large basin of water. The chieftain would wash his face and hands, comb his hair, and even blow his nose into the water. Then the basin would be passed to the next person, and the next, until everyone in the household had used the same dirty water. For a man like Fadlan, accustomed to the Islamic practice of wudu, ablution with clean running water before prayer, this was utterly disgusting. Their appearance was just as striking. Both men and women were covered in tattoos from their fingernails to their necks. These were dark green or blue-black designs, intricate patterns of trees, symbols and figures. This is one of the only written sources that explicitly mentions Viking tattoos, a detail that has captivated historians and enthusiasts for centuries. The men all carried weapons. Fadlan noted that each man was never without his axe, sword and knife. They were warriors and traders, and the line between the two was often blurry. Their axes were large and, in his words, Frankish-looking, suggesting a wide trade network. Fadlan also gave us a fascinating glimpse into their social structure and gender roles. He noted that the Rus women wore boxes on their chests, made of iron, silver, or gold, depending on their husband's wealth. From these boxes hung their knives. The wives of rich merchants wore golden and silver neck rings, one for every 10,000 dirhams her husband was worth. Some women had many, a public display of their family's status. It was a world where wealth was worn on the body. But perhaps the most famous and most dramatic part of Fadlan's account is his description of a Rus chieftain's funeral. This is an incredibly rare and detailed look at Viking burial customs, something we otherwise only know from archaeology and sagas written much later. When a chieftain died, his body was placed in a temporary grave for 10 days while his funeral preparations were made. His wealth was divided into 3 parts, one for his family, one to pay for his funeral clothes, and one to brew the enormous amounts of alcohol that would be consumed at the ceremony. Fadlan watched as they built a ship pyre on the riverbank. They placed the chieftain, dressed in his finest clothes, inside a pavilion on the ship's deck. They surrounded him with weapons, food, drink, and even sacrificed animals, a dog, horses, and cows. Then came the most chilling part. A slave girl, as Fadlan calls her, volunteered to die and join her master in the afterlife. She was treated like a queen for the days leading up to the funeral, feasting and singing. On the day of the ceremony, she was led to the ship. Fadlan describes a series of rituals where she was lifted over a doorframe, symbolically looking into the other world. She was given a strong drink and then led into the tent where her dead master lay. There, she was killed by 2 men with a rope and an old woman known as the Angel of Death, who stabbed her with a dagger. The whole time, men outside banged on their shields to drown out her cries. It was a brutal, ritualistic human sacrifice. Finally, the chieftain's closest male relative, completely naked, lit the ship on fire with a torch. The ship, the chieftain, the girl, and all the offerings were consumed in a massive blaze. One of the Rus explained their philosophy to Fadlan. He said, "You Arabs are foolish. You take the people you love and honor most and put them in the ground to be eaten by the earth and worms. We burn him in a moment so that he enters paradise at once." For the Rus, fire was a swift messenger to the gods, a way to transport the dead to the next world in a blaze of glory. Fadlan's account is a priceless historical document. Why? Because the Vikings themselves left no written records of their own culture. Their history was oral, passed down in stories and poems. The sagas, which were only written down centuries later by Christian Icelanders. While the sagas are amazing, they aren't objective history. They are heroic literature. Archaeology gives us artifacts, swords, ships, jewelry. But it can't tell us what people believed or how they acted. Fadlan's report is different. It's an immediate, first-hand eyewitness account from an outsider. He wasn't trying to write a heroic epic. He was writing a report, a travelogue. He was a neutral, if sometimes horrified, observer. He didn't understand their language or their worldview, which makes his descriptions all the more valuable. He just wrote down what he saw, from the tattoos and the dirty water to the terrifying grandeur of a ship funeral. His work gives us a raw, unfiltered look at the Rus Vikings of the Volga. It confirms things found in archaeology, like their extensive trade networks reaching all the way to Baghdad, and it adds incredible details that archaeology could never reveal. It shows us that the Viking world was not isolated to Scandinavia and Western Europe. These Rus traders were a major force on the rivers of Eastern Europe, connecting the Baltic Sea to the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea, trading slaves, furs and swords for Arab silver and silk. Ahmad ibn Fadlan's journey into the land of darkness was a failure in its original diplomatic purpose. But for history, it was a spectacular success. His keen eye and diligent pen captured a lost world, preserving a unique snapshot of Viking life on the eastern frontier. Without this scholar from Baghdad, a huge and fascinating chapter of Viking history would be little more than silent artifacts and scattered bones. His words bring that world, in all its strange and brutal glory, vividly back to life. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more journeys into the past.